All right, welcome everybody to the Transformative Research Award webinar. Thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you with us. Just before we begin, there are a couple housekeeping items I'd like to go over with you. If you have a question, we ask that you submit it through the WebEx Q&A box. It's different from the chat. The Q&A box will allow us to organize the questions a bit more, mark them when we've answered them versus the chat. So please submit your questions through that Q&A box. At this webinar, we will not be addressing scientific or situationally specific questions. If you have questions that are more detailed and more specific to you, we ask you to please email us at our email box at transformative_awards@mail.nih.gov, and we will respond to your question there. However, if you have a question that's of broader interest and more applicable to a wider array of people, we do ask you to submit that through the Q&A box so we can answer it at this webinar. If the webinar will be recorded and we will post the slides on our website at commonfund.nih.gov/tra. So you can go there in give us a week or two to post things, and then you can go and view the webinar and download the slides. We also encourage you to go to our website for more application guidance. We have a great application and award guide that has a lot of relevant information for you. That it includes example applications. Please note that these applications are older and they may not follow all of the formatting and the instructions that are present in the current funding opportunity. So don't use those example applications as a way to, think that you're going to be following all the directions that are in the funding opportunity. Instead, you can use it as a way of looking at some of the ways people have laid out their proposals, their thoughts, their structure, but don't use them for formatting, please. And I'd like to just introduce our panelists today. We have Dr. Trish Lebowski, who is the program leader for the High Risk, High Reward Research Program in the Office of the Director. We also have Dr. Sarita Sastry, who's a Scientific Review Officer in the Center for Scientific Review. We also have Ellie Murcia, who is the Program Specialist, also in the Office of the Director. And me, I'm Becky Miller. I'm a Program Officer also in the Office of the Director. So before we launch into the Transformative Research Award, I'm going to ask Trish to give us a little more information about the Common Fund.
Thanks, Becky. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. I'm warning everyone that we have big thunderstorms outside the window. So if something weird happens with connectivity and we disappear, that might be the reason. If that happens, we'll deal with that afterwards. So as Becky said, I just want to give you a little bit of context. So we're in the Office of the Director. These funds for this program, these awards come from the Office of the Director. And we're in this office called down there in the bottom left of your slide, the Office of Strategic Coordination that runs the NIH Common Fund. This is a list on the slide, and I'm not going to read them all, of all the current NIH Common Fund programs. And we put this here really just to let you know about these programs because they might be an important resource for you. They include things like the four-dimensional nucleome, stimulating peripheral activity to relieve conditions, metabolomics you've probably heard of, somatic cell genome editing, and so on and so forth. So what's in common about most of our programs is they provide resources for the broader research community. So if you click that, Becky, we want you to be aware of them because you might find things that would be useful to you in these programs. So we have high-end instrumentation, transformative cryo-electron microscopy centers, a huge number of databases, as well as reagents and protocols across all these areas of science. But today, what we're going to focus on is the High Risk, High Reward Research Program, which encompasses 4 different award programs. And we're going to talk today about the Transformative Research Award. So on the next slide, these are our 4 programs. in this one research area, the Pioneer Award, the New Innovator Awards, Transformative Research Award, and the Early Independence Award. One of the things they have in common is that they're all designed to support research scientists at all different career stages, different ones for some of these different programs, that are the scientists proposing really amazing, outstanding, high-risk, high-impact research. Every year, we have new funding opportunities for each of these 4 programs, and only one a year. So it's not on a regular, even though this is a Transformative Research Award and we're using the R1, it's not on a regular R01 cycle. It's different. So the next slide. Another thing, you have to be proposing things that are high risk and high impact. So if you're proposing something that folks would predict would be the next logical experiment that you or your lab would conduct, that's not what we're looking for, okay? The next slide. We don't require any preliminary data, and we don't require a detailed experimental plan for any of these 4 programs. However, I'll tell you that reviewers need to really understand what you're doing, and you might decide to add some preliminary data to establish feasibility. It depends on what you're looking at yourself. So the next slide. It's very important that because we're in the office of the director, we don't have a focused, limited research mission. So any topic relevant to the overall NIH mission is welcome. This could include behavioral science, social science, any kind of biomedical research, applied, formal, basic translational or clinical research, could be a clinical trial. Any of these areas are welcome. So if you email me to say, is this area covered in the Transformative Research Award, I will say yes. And then we can talk more. But my guess is the answer will be yes. The next click, we are encouraging investigators with diverse backgrounds and from all eligible institutions. It doesn't matter that you might not be at a medical school or not be at a research intensive institution. We encourage you to apply because we are happy to support projects from those institutions. The next click, this is just a list of names that is our Trans NIH high risk, high reward working groups. So these are primarily program, but also grants management and review staff across all the institutes and centers at NIH. I can say that of all the 27 institutes and centers, they're all represented on this slide. And that's just to show you that we really do want research from across the entire spectrum of all biomedical research. And these individuals help us. They pay attention to the program and they help us with administering awards afterwards. So next slide. So let's talk a bit about the Transformative Research Award. Again, it's a key part of this high-risk, high-reward program, and it's designed to support exceptionally innovative or perhaps unconventional projects with the potential to develop or overturn fundamental paradigms to really make a difference, okay? Started back in 2009, and it's open to either single PIs or multi-PIs. So it could be a single PI, one person, or it could be a team of 3 to 10, whatever is needed for the science. Those individuals can be at any or all career stage. Again, we don't require any preliminary data. The budget is flexible, and you do not need prior approval for large budget requests. You tell us what it takes to do the science that you're proposing. Now, one of the caveats is it's a 5-year award, it can't be renewed. So you need to spell out very clearly what you're going to accomplish in those 5 years. And then, if you get the award around year 3, 3.5, 4, you better think of how you're going to fund projects that come afterwards. One of the things that's novel here, and we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, is we're piloting an anonymized review process. And that makes these applications quite different from anything else that you've ever applied for at NIH. Next slide. This is an R01 mechanism that most of you are probably used to, but it's very different. We are using it in a very unconventional way. So do not think that, oh, I can just repurpose the R01 that I submitted last year because I have some new data or, whatever. It's very different. We use the specific aims page, but again, we use it differently. It's not used to be listing the specific aims. Instead, it's a one-page summary of the project. And really, you have to articulate why your project is aligned with the spirit of the Transformative Award Initiative. So there are two sections, one of them, and we tell you all this in the funding opportunity. I'm reporting it here, but it's all written down there. There are two sections. They do not include specific aims, okay? The first section is significance, innovation, and impact. And the second is insight and rationale. We can talk more about those later, but it's key that you write it differently from your expected specific aims page. The research strategy is also used, but again, it's different. It's not like a typical R01 where you would expect to write a lot of preliminary data and really a lot of the experimental details. But instead, what we want you to do is talk about how this project is relevant for this award program. And again, we break it down of 5 different sections that you should use. An overview, so you set the context for the reader. The approach, again, you don't need all the experimental details, but the reviewers need to understand your logic and they need to understand that you're going to carry out the research with appropriate robustness and rigor. In addition, you can include some preliminary data there, but you don't have to, okay? The third category is innovation. Why is this special and innovative? What's different here? The fourth category, explain to the reviewers why this is appropriate for a transformative research award. Why is this high risk, high reward and not a traditional R01? And I would advise you not to say because of the budget. That is not an acceptable reason. The reviewers won't buy that. And then finally, the last bullet is a timeline for what you're going to produce when during the 5-year project if you get the award. And that might include some critical go or no-go decision points in the project. So next slide. Here's some considerations for you to think about when you're writing your research strategy. Rita will talk a little bit more about the review, but remember, the reviewers might not be topic experts. So you need to write that for the reviewer that's the really smart, very, very insightful scientist that might not be a topic expert. So make sure that they can understand that. So you're not going to want to have a application that's written heavily with jargon, and any jargon you have, you might want to sort of ease that in and define it well before you lose the reviewer. You might want to begin with a description of the landscape of the field, current boundaries, challenges to the science, and provide the context that's appropriate and so that the reviewers can understand why your project is so innovative and why that if the project is successful, you'd have incredible impact on the field. So make it clear you know exactly what you're going to do. And that might include things like discussing which aspects of the project are risky and which aspects are going to need alternative approaches. This might not work. How are you going to get around it? This is what we would do alternatively. So make sure you include sort of standard R01 discussion items like that. And then finally, you need to convince reviewers that you're going to do this in a robust and rigorous way. You're going to validate any novel approaches you design. You should include estimations of how many humans or animal subjects, whatever you're using. So some statistical analysis might be required. Say why you're going to use that many people. Make sure you include things like sex as a biological variable if that's appropriate for the research you're proposing. So next slide. A couple years ago, 2019, which feels like a lifetime ago because it was before the pandemic, there was a special committee that the NIH director listens closely to, this advisory committee to the director. They issued a report, and the link is there. You can take a look at it afterwards because we will, the slides will be posted later. And what they've said is that they found that overall the high risk, high reward program is really good at supporting very innovative and impactful research. But they felt that underrepresented groups overall were not adversely affected by the review process. But more importantly, what they showed was that members of underrepresented groups don't apply at a rate that reflects their composition in the workforce. So the other thing that they showed that they were not happy with was that awards tend to go to a subset of institutions. In order to address this, we've piloted an anonymized review that we're working on, and that you will have to anonymize your application for this program. So on the next slide, the intention here is that when you write your proposal, you should focus on the science, focus on the research idea, the innovation, and potential impact. So the investigator and environment criteria, they're going to be evaluated at the very end of this multi-phase review. But for most of the review, the reviewers will not have the identity of the PIs or the institutions from which the grants come. So we started this pilot in 2021. It's early yet, and these are not statistically powered results, but the results are sort of encouraging. We've seen that many of the applicants, a substantial fraction of the applicants, were incentivized to apply because of the anonymization. Folks felt that this was a good thing and they wanted to apply. Applicants felt they were able to prepare their applications conveying innovation and impact, even though they were anonymized. And reviewers, because we surveyed both reviewers and applicants, reviewers were able to evaluate innovation and impact with the applications that they received. So this is the 4th year, and we're continuing the pilot this year. I don't know how long it will go, so I can't answer that question, but we are doing it again this year. So 2 of the documents that I already mentioned must be anonymized when you apply, and that means the specific aims page and the research strategy. And they can't contain any of the information bulleted out on the slide. So no names, whether or not they're in the proposed research. No names of institutions, again, whether or not they're in the grant itself, okay? The research strategy is 12 pages. So where did I go? Oh, you can mention an institution if it's some sort of a publicly available resource, like a database or a biobank or something like that. You cannot mention any honors or awards or anything else that you as the PI might have received. No hyperlinks at all. That's in general, you shouldn't have hyperlinks in a grant, but we're very strict here about it. Nothing, no reference to your accomplishments that are out there in the public domain. So you can't say, we developed this novel technology, and then go on to, refer to whatever technology that the person could easily identify you and know who you are from that. You can't say, our team was the first to do this, or our collaborators are pioneers in this. So nothing that could be potentially identifiable for you. Your citations, they all have to be numeric citations, no Miller et al. 2020. And I say that because Becky is here. You have to have it be citation number 1, all right? Because people might be able to figure out who that is. Importantly, make sure that you read your figure legends carefully because oftentimes people forget about that. And make sure your endnote is correct when you have the final version of your document that you're submitting, because if you miss a bracket on an endnote, it won't be formatted correctly and it'll still say Miller et al. So any other text that you might have in there, you can't have University of whoever's IRB has approved this study. That's identifiable. So think about all of those things, because if you do that, we're going to have to withdraw your application if you break anonymity with any of these items. And it always happens every year. So I'd really rather not have to do that to you. So please be careful, okay? So next slide. So you have to follow those instructions, and remember there's only 2 of the documents in the whole pile that you'll submit in your PDF that have to be anonymized: the research aims and the specific aims and the research strategy. In general, it's better if you have a question, it's better to try to comply than it is to try to game the system. So don't try to get around the anonymization because it really won't help you in the end. So all the rest of the components of the application, you should follow the normal SF424 application guide that you should all know, and the links are within the funding opportunity. But only those 2, specific aims and research strategy, are anonymized. You do need to discuss how you as the PI is suitable for the proposed research, and you can do that in the biosketch for individual PIs or multiple PIs. That's where that information will go. So the next slide, we have a tool for this, so we can help. And I really strongly encourage folks to do this, okay? You upload your documents and it'll scan the documents for any of these items that could violate the anonymization requirements. So names, references, honors, etc. So it takes a couple minutes, but it'll give it back to you and it'll have highlighted potential violations. So we're not telling you that those are definitely in violation. It's up to you to decide whether or not that violates the anonymization. So this is not the final verdict, okay? That's up to you. The tool is designed to err on the side of false positives. And you as the PI need to decide how you're going to change the text to follow the rules. So after they're submitted, after the deadline, this is the tool that we as NIH staff will use to try to screen the documents to make sure they're anonymized. So we will get the same results you will. So don't think that we're not going to see it. We will. Okay. So the next slide, this is the website, commonfund.nih.gov/TRA for Transformative Research Award. And up at the top is a little compliance meter there. You can click on track tool there, TRACC tool there, or in the bottom. So we have a couple different places on the website. You just click on that, and on the next slide, it comes up with this website. So you'll need to log in with your normal government, the government login, and then go through the instructions here. I'm not going to read them all. They're on that website. So this is the dashboard then, once you've logged in, that will come up. It'll have the document, the file name that you submitted. It'll have the original, and then it'll give you back one that will be highlighted with potential violations, okay? It takes a couple minutes to do a specific aims page, comes back in probably less than a minute, but a 12-page research strategy might take, maybe half an hour or so. You'll be sent an email when it's ready, and then it clicks back. So do not do this the day before the due date, okay? On the next slide, we blurred it out here, but you can kind of see what it might look like. So this is the output file that you'd receive back. So you get highlighted text that could be the potential violations. And again, it's supposed to err on the side of giving you a false positive. So if you write Watson Crick, it's going to highlight it. Chances are you're probably not either of those individuals, so that's probably okay. But it'll highlight it for you, and then you make the decision. It'll highlight things like ELISA. It'll highlight company names from which you might be purchasing, I don't know, a library or antibodies or whatever. So you have to decide whether or not you're going to change that. So again, it's voluntary. You don't have to use this. I'm not going to know if you used it, but I think it could be really helpful, and I would ask that you do this. I think everything that we've had to administratively withdraw was caught easily with this tool. So, okay. So now there's one more thing that's new, and it's new to not only you as the applicant, but also us at NIH. So we're all learning here. We're bound to make mistakes, but every application requires a data management and sharing plan. All right. So you're probably going to produce data if you get this award. So you need to explain how the data generated by the project is going to be managed, and which kinds of scientific data and metadata are going to be shared. So you attach it in that other plan section as described there. It's only 2 pages, so it's not, in gross detail, but you need to include these things that are indicated: what kind of data, what kind of tools or software or code you're going to be generating, standards, and how the data will be preserved, how people can access it, and the associated timelines for that. Also, oversight of the data management sharing. Who's going to be in charge of that? You have to indicate cost as a line item in the budget. You have to justify those costs. So that budget will be considered by reviewers, but it does not drive the review or the priority score. The plan would then be reviewed by NIH program staff after it was decided that the application would become an award, and adjustments would be made through the just-in-time process after that. It will become a terms and condition of your award, so it's serious and we have to be accurate about it. This is an NIH-wide policy. It's not specific to our office. So the website there in red, sharing.nih.gov, is got a plethora of information. So lots of information, lots of examples. You can go there and look. And I think it's important. It's not just for this TRA award. Any application you submit, you're going to need to have this. So it'd be good to read about it now. And I think that is my last slide. I'm going to hand the camera and the microphone over to Sarita, who's our scientific review officer in charge of the review.
Great. Thank you, Trish, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon or morning, depending on your time zone. So I just want to go over the process by which the Transformative Research Awards will be reviewed, and as well as the timelines. Can I have the next slide, please? So the review process is a multi-stage one, and it's reviewed by an editorial board initially, as opposed to topic experts, as Trish alluded to earlier. So these are going to be reviewers with very broad and very, knowledgeable reviewers, but not, going to be an expert in your particular field. So when you're writing the application, as Trish mentioned, you're going to want to be able, you're going to want them to be able to understand it. So the first phase will be reviewed by the editorial board. In phase 1, they're going to review only the specific aims page. From there, a subset of those applications are going to be advanced to phase 2. So in phase 2 now, topic experts will be assigned to each application, and they're going to review the anonymized specific aims page as well as the research strategy, and they'll provide written review comments for those applications. Once that's completed, then the specific aims, research strategy, and the comments from the topic experts, male reviewer comments, will be return back to the editorial board members, where they will look at them and basically provide a preliminary impact score. Once this is completed, then a subset of those applications will be selected for discussion, and a full review of the application will take place. Can I have the next slide? So to go into a little bit more detail, so in phase one, the initial editorial review of the applications, here, like I mentioned, only the specific aims page will be reviewed. The editorial board is composed of about 16 to 20 senior scientists with broad and collective expertise on a very diverse range of topics that cover the entire NIH research portfolio. Each editor is going to review about 40 to 50 applications, depending on how many applications we have. And this is based on the anonymized specific aims page. And what they're going to do is put them into bins based on their assessment of the transformative impact potential of the application. So each application is reviewed by 4 editors, and then the top scoring applications plus any rescued applications are advanced to phase 2. The due date for the applications is September 1, and we estimate that administrative review of the anonymization will be completed by mid-September. Once that happens, then the applications will go to phase 1 review and should be completed by mid-November. Next slide. So in phase 2, then the top scoring applications from phase 1 will be reviewed, both the specific aims page as well as the research strategy sections by male reviewers who are topic experts in the specific area of science that is in each application. There will be 3 male reviewers per application, and they will only have access to the anonymized specific aims page and the research strategy section. The male reviewers will provide written comments on the significance, the transformative impact, the innovation, and the logic of the approach. This review will take place from about December of 2023 until about mid-February of 2024. And roughly, we expect about 70 to 80 applications to advance to the phase 2 review. Next slide. So for the phase 3 review now, the editorial board will come back and review the specific aims, the research strategy, and they'll take a look at the male reviewer comments that were the result of phase 2. Each of the editors will get about 15 to 20 applications to review, and they'll provide a preliminary impact score that will take into account their own assessment, as well as the input from the male reviewers. And so generally about the top half of the phase 2 applications, plus any rescues, will be selected for final review and discussion in phase 3B. This will occur in about late February to late March of 2024. Next slide. So then in the final phase, phase 3B, the applications that were selected, the top half, will be discussed. So here, the editorial board will have full access to the complete application, including all of the information, the bio sketches, the human subject, vertebrate animals, all of the grant applications, as well as the investigator and environment information. So here, they will provide a final impact score, taking into account their own assessment of the entire application, as well as input from the panel discussion and the comments from the male reviewers. So here, we expect this review to take place sometime in late March, possibly early April. And the number of applications will be based on the prior phase of applications where the top half of the applications are selected and whether there are any rescues. Next. So again, this is the overview, as I've stated. One thing to keep in mind is that once you've submitted your application and the phase 1 review is complete, you will not receive any review results until the final phase 3B results have been completed, that the review meeting has taken place. So the contact PI, you won't be able to see the application status during the anonymized review phase of the applications. Next slide. Okay.
All right, thank you, Sarita and Trish. All right, so we are now at the Q&A portion of the webinar, and we will be taking your questions that you may have in the Q&A box. So once again, if you do have a question, please put them there. We also have questions that were submitted to our email earlier before the webinar, so we also be going through those. So I'll be reading the questions, and Trish and Sarita, I'll pass them out to you as appropriate. So I've binned these into some broad categories to try to keep us a little bit organized here, but feel free to ask questions, any questions that you may have, and we'll try to put them in the proper bin if we're able to. So Trish, this one is for you. Could you please talk more about what is meant by transformative research?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that what you should do is think about how your research is going to change things, how it might develop new paradigms. Maybe it's going to challenge an existing paradigm. I like to tell people to think about how you're going to change information in maybe the intro biology textbook in your area, something like that. You might be developing some technology that would be broadly applicable for many folks, not just in your area of research, but more broadly. Or maybe there'd be a major improvement in healthcare if you're doing something therapeutic, right? Or diagnostic. So we understand that these will have risk. We invite the high risk, but that's another reason that those applications or these kind of projects won't fare well in a standard R01 because they won't be kind of safe or easily feasible. So that's what we mean about transformative. And you have to talk about that in the application. You can't just say this research will be transformative. You have to say why, and you have to convince the reviewers of that. And as Sarita explained, it's critical on that very first page, because if you don't convince reviewers in that one page that it's going to be transformative, you're done. So it's really probably the most important part of your application.
Excellent. All right. Can non-US citizens apply? So Trish?
Yeah, you can apply as a non-US citizen, but you have to apply from a US institution. So you can't apply from, I don't know, maybe a place in Canada or, France or the UK. But if you are a Canadian citizen employed at a US institution, yes, for sure.
And follow up, do all PIs need to be based in the US, or can it be a collaboration between a US-based institution and an international institution?
Well, you could have a subcontract to a non-US based institution, but you wouldn't want that person to be a PI. They could be, or a co-I. They could be a collaborator, for example, and you could subcontract out some of the cost to them, but they shouldn't be one of the MPIs.
All right, and also for you, Trish, will pre-tenure PIs be considered if a strong collaboration team, if there's a strong collaboration team in science?
Pre-tenure PIs can be considered whether or not they're in a team. They could be a single PI applying, and they could be pre-tenure. Any career stage is welcome and is invited. You have to be allowed by your institution to apply for an R01. That's the only thing. If you're a postdoc or a student, then probably no, but certainly pre-tenure is fine.
And kind of a follow-on question to that, do junior PIs have a chance at all, though? Because it looks rare among past awardees.
Well, you're right. It might be a little bit more competitive. This is not an ESI or a sort of a junior PI based program. This is open to everyone, but they certainly have a chance, and we've made awards to people pre-tenure for sure. If you are an ESI, you might want to look at the new innovator program to make sure that which one is the right choice for you. The other option, if you're still a postdoc, not started your own lab yet, or you're thinking about starting your own lab soon, you might want to look at the Early Investigator Award. So make sure that you're looking at the right award. But junior PIs for sure are have a chance, yes.
All right. And also for you, Trish, what is considered high risk?
Right. Well, it shouldn't be, for example, it shouldn't be like the next obvious experiment that someone would expect you to do based on your previous publications or earlier grants. It should be something that might not be obvious. It should be your sort of pie in the sky, a little bit crazy idea. But you need to convince the reviewers that you have a plan to mitigate that risk, and you have alternatives for things that might be exceptionally risky.
Sarita, are preliminary data needed or should they not be included?
So preliminary data is not required for the application. And I think Trish mentioned, it's certainly permissible to include preliminary data if you want to in the application.
Okay, and Trish, can current HRHR awardees, especially the earlier career PIs with a DP5 or DP2, apply to the Transformative Research Award? And if yes, does their HRHR awardee status affect the committee's decision on funding the TRA?
So yes, of course they can apply. We want people again, at all stages of their career, everyone's eligible. What was the second part? Oh, if your current award would be used basically against you, like you already have a DP2, why are you applying for a TRA? No, that doesn't matter. That should not apply to the review. The review should be, well, the review criteria are clearly spelled out, right? And in fact, sometimes if you're a previous DP2 awardee, for example, that might give you a leg up. They might say this person has the track record of having been very creative and having, accomplished high risk, high reward projects previously. So I don't think it should ever count against you, no.
And Trish, we get this all the time. How many applications are generally submitted and how many are funded?
Two. The answer is two. No. So we're not allowed to say how many are submitted because this is an RFA, and that's the case with any call for applications. But what we can tell you is the success rate. And remind me, Becky, it was on a slide. It's less than 10%, right?
Yeah, it's between
Yeah.
5 and 7.
Yeah, between 5 and 7%. And that depends, it varies from year to year. So I can't tell you what it's going to be next year, but it's somewhere in that area. This is not an easy competition. This is true.
Right. Are there any specific fields you are funding or not funding? For example, would research on an innovative solution to improve post-intensive care syndromes outcomes be an option?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned before, anything in the NIH mission space is welcomed. And yeah, we want anything. We do not make funding decisions based primarily on the area of the research. It's really based on reviews and how well the reviewers appreciate your project.
All right. What is the ideal number of PIs? So Trish,
Again, two. No, I'm kidding. No, whatever is needed for the science. I think that, I can't answer that question. You have to tell us if you need multiple PIs because you need the expertise to attack various aspects of the project. you should have them. You have to decide whether they would be full PIs, a co-investigator, or a collaborator. That's strictly up to you as the applicant.
Right, and then going on, are multi-disease areas encouraged? Maybe it is transformative in that it changes a neuroscience textbook, generates therapeutics for repurposing for cancer, and demonstrates technology that is disease agnostics. I guess multi-disease areas, that kind of cross-discipline encouraged.
Oh yeah, sure. We encourage things that are catalytic across different areas of research. Say if you were developing some sort of really cool new imaging technique and you're going to focus on, I don't know, pancreatic beta cells, but somebody else could use that to look at maybe synapses in the brain or synapses in the peripheral nervous system or something. That would be great. That's called impact. And if others would use the products from your research, that's a positive. So you have to be careful with scope, that you're not proposing so much work that you would do all of that, because you need to have it be realistic within the time and budget for the grant. If you propose to do too much and the reviewers say this is, way overly ambitious, that would work against you. So it has to be realistic.
And another one, Trish, this is a good one. Does high risk include projects that have an exploratory component?
Sure, exploratory is fine. I mean, there cannot be a risk. For example, if you're doing a clinical trial, you have to protect the participants. There can't be that kind of risk. But maybe I'm not understanding it. But yeah, no, exploratory is fine.
All right. For a team, is it necessary to have a leader PI, or can we have multiple PIs?
So yeah, if you have a team of multiple PIs, you have to include things like a multiple PI plan. These are standard for any NIH grant that has multiple PIs. So you'll read about that in the SF424 directions, but you have whatever you need, whatever the science needs. But usually there's a contact PI that would be the primary contact. And then the other PIs, you have to talk about how y'all would interact, what you would do if there was a disagreement, what would happen if someone left. So those things are all included in a multi-PI plan.
Right. And Trish, is the program open to pre-submission inquiries?
Well, you can send me information and I'm happy to meet with you and talk to you about it, but you don't need to submit a letter of intent or anything like that. And as long as your work is in the NIH mission space, I'll be telling you that it's appropriate for the initiative. So it depends on what you want to get out of that pre-submission inquiry. If I meet with people, I usually talk mostly about the program and what's needed and the anonymization. And we're open to any science that you're interested in proposing.
Right. And Sarita, will one lose their ESI status if they apply and receive this award?
That is a great question. I believe that it's an R01 type award, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an R01 equivalent, which means, yeah, if you apply for it as an ESI, you would no longer be eligible as an ESI. That's my understanding.
Yes.
All right. And Trish, I guess these are some similar questions. So maybe first off, could you talk about the difference between the Pioneer and Transformative Research Award?
Sure, yeah, there are several differences, and we actually have a tool on our website. You can go in and answer like sort of little quiz questions, and it'll point you toward the right one. Some of the keys, though, is that a Pioneer is a single PI application, and you, the PI, is a big part of the review criteria. So that's a big difference because the trial can be open to teams. It could be a single PI, but it could also be a team. The Pioneer has a fixed budget. Oh heck, it's $750 a year for 5 years. No matter what you're proposing, that's the budget. And we're very flexible about it in terms of the justification. But the try, you have to tell us what the budget is. We're not going to tell you. And of course, you have to justify it. Both of them require very innovative projects, high risk, high reward projects. But those, I think, are the two main differences. They're both 5 years. And of course, the anonymization of the Transformative is a big difference. The Pioneers are not anonymized. The Pioneer, the final discussion phase of the review is actually an interview too, which is pretty different. But again, go to our website and poke at that tool. It's called an award decision tool. It should be down on the bottom in the panels there. You can have a look.
All right, and then is it possible to propose the same project for both the Pioneer and Transformative Research Award?
Well, as long as you're not applying to both in the same year, you can, because it's an NIH-wide policy, no matter what, no matter where you submit them, that you cannot submit the same science, the same set of experiments to more than one application at a time. You can't have them both under review at the same time. But you could apply for a Pioneer this year and a TRA next year if you wanted, or something like that. That's totally fine, but not at the same time.
Right, and Trish, another one. Are certain NIH institutes participating? Was it for this initiative, I suppose is what they mean.
So all of them participate, at least at, in different levels, and sometimes they will co-fund an application. Maybe that's what you mean. Usually the funds come primarily from the office of the director, but if there's something that's particularly interesting to an institute or center at the end, then sometimes they co-fund things. And our whole working group, we have representatives from every single institute and center, and they participate. So yes, they are all involved.
All right, let's move on to the next topic area, which is application and submission. Sarita, there's one for you. The Transformative Research Award doesn't require preliminary data, but if preliminary data are included, will the application be reviewed with less enthusiasm? For example, for a PI to suggest that a long-standing dogma is wrong would require preliminary data to show that the PI suggestion has merit. That might require several pieces of preliminary data. Will the inclusion of that data disqualify or diminish the application prospects?
So although preliminary data is not required, it is certainly permissible, and I don't think it's going to hurt the application. I mean, I think you have to make a case for why this research is transformative and what is its significance and impact. Justify the rigor of the, preliminary data to make your case. So no, I don't think it will hurt the application, the review.
Um, all right, Trish, are these funded by one institute? And is it a strength to make it particularly applicable to one institute, or is it more responsive to make the project applicable to many institutes?
Well, these are primarily funded by the Office of the Director. As I mentioned before, sometimes an institute or center might pick one up, but primarily it's the Office of the Director. So no, I don't think it's important to make it to point it toward one institute or center. However, if the science is cross-cutting, crosses many different fields, like we talked about a couple minutes ago, that might make it more appealing in terms of impact to the reviewers. So no, I wouldn't say, I'm a neurodevelopment person, so I wouldn't say that this applies specifically to NINDS, because what if that, does that push away NIMH? NINDS is neuro disease and stroke, and MH is mental health. So you wouldn't want to, by saying that you're pointing it toward one institute or center, kind of leave out the other 26, right? Because a lot of this research is cross-cutting, and that would be a huge plus. So I wouldn't back yourself into a corner that way. You don't need to point to any specific institute at all.
Okay. Trish, also for you, what happens if an important inspiration for the research proposal comes from a paper that is not from my lab? What would be the proper way to address that without breaking anonymity rules? And would it be worse if a grant collaborator is the author of that paper?
Well, that's a good one. I mean, obviously you can't identify the paper, right? You can only reference it by a number that would be in the bibliography that would not be available to the reviewers at first. And you can't name a technique, like let's just pretend you invented ChIP-seq, 500 years ago or whatever it was. So you wouldn't want to use anything like that that would say, my lab developed ChIP-seq, and therefore we're going to try to apply it in this way or modify it in this way to make it, better, faster, stronger. So that's a tricky one. You'd have to be very careful. In general, it's totally fine if the inspiration for your transformative idea came from anyone's paper. That doesn't matter at all. But you do need to be careful in the way you write about it, that you don't reveal what the paper or who those PIs that wrote that paper were, right? You would talk strictly about the science. I think that's the most useful way to think about it, is that just going to talk about the science. You're going to develop a technique that will, I don't know, that however you want to describe it, but it will be applicable to many fields, but it will be new and different, and it'll have great impact. It's innovative. No one's ever done this before. So you have to talk about it that way without naming the technique or naming the person that originally invented it, whether it's you or someone else. I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. I don't know if I was clear as mud there. I hope you get it.
Yeah, and there's a similar question, I think that I'll read it out loud, but I think Trish, you answered this already. But when there is a lab that has a technology that just uses it, or just the use of it will suggest who I am, how do you stay anonymous? I think Trish answered that with make sure that you stick to describing the science to keep yourself anonymous. Trish, another question. My idea comes from a completely different approach or view from data that were published from my lab. The project is completely innovative to my lab and their lab too. So I think the question is, what happens if the reviewers can infer the identity of the PI just from that novels?
Well, I mean, it's not a test for them, right? Their job is not to figure out who submitted it. Their job is to review the science and to look at the review criteria and score it and critique it based on those criteria. It's not to figure out who it is. Sometimes they think they know. It really doesn't matter. There's no quiz at the end, and there's no benefit in either direction if you can be identified. So as long as we look through your application, and we look through all of them, and make sure that there's nothing where you obviously violated one of those rules we set out, then it'll be fine. There's no quiz at the end where they say, yes, I know it's so-and-so's lab, and then you're disqualified. That's not the case. So go with the spirit of the anonymization and follow the rules.
Okay. So Trish, can preliminary data come from published work?
Yes, but you have to make sure it's still anonymous, right? You can't say in this, I don't know, JCI paper from 2019, we showed blah, 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 and show the figure. Instead, I would just simply maybe show the figure. but don't cite it because that would be breaking the anonymity. It can have an endnote citation, but don't cite it in a way that would give away the identity of your lab.
And also for you, Trish, can an investigator apply for a Pioneer Award with one type of proposal and in the same year apply for a Transformative Research Award as part of a multi-PI team proposing totally different science compared to that of the Pioneer?
Sure, that's totally fine. As long as they're not the same science, you can do both at the same time.
All right. Trish, if your innovation is demonstrably innovative through a newly issued patent, can you mention that without citing the specific patent information?
That's a tricky one. Um, I suppose you could say this, we have no, I wouldn't. I think I would focus on the science, because that's an award or an honor and sort of, or it's kind of like a publication. I would probably use an endnote citation, and cite it that way, but I wouldn't state this, we patented this new invention. I think that would be a violation.
Okay. Trish, another one. Does your team have to have a proven track record together, as new innovation can require new players coming together that have never thought to work together?
That's a good question. Well, remember, the reviewers aren't going to know who you are, so they can't look to see if you published previously or not. But I think in the area talking about your qualifications at the end in the biosketch, you can certainly talk about that. You can list sort of general, we're working together as a cell biologist and a biochemist and a bioinformatics, 3 PIs working together. But if I guess you can say that you've published together in the past or you're at the same institution, as long as you can't be identified through all that, it's fine. I would not say we published 5 papers, including last month in, Nature or something like that. I wouldn't do that, but you could mention that you have a track record of collaboration and you've worked on things in the past. Just don't be specific enough for them, the reviewers, to figure out who you are.
Right, and another one for you, Trish. In terms of craziness versus detail, would this be closer to a DP2 versus a traditional R01?
Oh yeah, for sure. If you're used to the DP2, if you've written those before and hopefully successfully, I hope, this is a little bit more like that in terms of discussing and, proposing something with a lot of innovation and the high risk, high reward impact that you would have done with for a DP2. Yeah.
Right, and Trish, should citations be included in the specifics aims page?
Well, you shouldn't cite anything, right? Because that would violate the anonymity. If you want to include, like numeric endnote citations, that's fine. You can have that in the specific aims page. Remember, it's not a regular specific aims page. Yeah, I don't know how much that would help you. You have to decide, but
And not sure I can answer this one, but
okay.
so Tricia, for multiple PIs in universities, I understand you are not allowed to list, but can you give characteristics of demographics related to the work? For example, targeted various clinical underrepresented minorities.
Yeah, I think if you do it carefully, that could work. Um, I think I would need to see an example, but I think done well, that could work. Again, as long as you don't mention the actual institution's name, you might say this is a medical school, or you might say this is a research tube, whatever. That would be fine.
Okay. All right.
Run
That's
it through the track tool and see what it says.
true. Yes, that is a very handy tool to use.
Yes.
All right, so let's move on to budget questions now. Trish, are there any caps in the R&R budget?
Yes, there is a cap. The cap is that you can't ask for more than what the entire budget is for the whole initiative. And I think it's around $8 million a year. So you can't ask for more than that. That does include indirect cost. So don't make it be 8 million direct costs, and then it would be too much. But if you have something that huge, it's going to have to be incredibly compelling to get it through review at that level. But there's not a cap, no.
Um, and Trish, are foreign components allowed?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it can be a foreign component, but it can't be from the contact BI can't be at that institution. So the other thing you'll need to be careful about, I would look through the NIH policies in general on that, but there would need to be clearance from the US State Department. And remember, even if you're if you're collaborating with somebody at a foreign institution, that they would end up being you know, an author on your publication from the project or something like that, or if you're using animals from that site or anything like that, that all would all be included under foreign components. So be careful, include them if they're needed, but be careful to make sure you're clear about that this is a foreign component. And there are things in the 424 in the instructions that tell you how to do that.
All right, and also Trish, how much time and effort are recipients expected to vote to the project?
Whatever the science calls for. We don't have a cap or a cutoff for that at all, but you have to devote enough time that we really know that you will be working on the project. So if it's like 2% effort for the contact PI who's doing most of the heavy lifting, that would probably not be a good idea. Make sure it is commensurate with the needs of the proposal.
All right, and that looks like that's all the budget questions. So let's go on to review, where we have quite a few of those.
Mm.
Um, okay. Sarita, see, will we be invited to apply for phase 2 based on the specific aims, or is the whole application submitted at the same time?
So there is no, as Trish mentioned, letter of intent. So the full application has to be submitted by the deadline of September 1st. The specific aims page is reviewed first, and then if it advances to phase 2, then the research strategy is evaluated. You're not asked to submit a portion of the application after the specific aims page is reviewed.
All right, and also for you, which set of scores will applicants have access to after the review is complete?
So the phase 3B is the only phase of the application where there is a final score that's released. All other, so if the application didn't get a score in phase 3B, those applications are not discussed or unscored.
And is the editorial board composed of NIH internal or external reviewers?
Primarily external reviewers. I mean, NIH reviewers are permitted in peer review. However, for the most part, the majority of editorial board members are external reviewers.
And are the editorial boards different between phase 1 and phase 3 AB?
No, it's the exact same set of editorial board members.
And can you elaborate on what is meant by rescuing an application?
Yeah, sure. So applications are selected to advance based on their initial score. So there's a cutoff, but reviewers can, if they feel that compelled that there are certain applications that may have be compelling to advance, they can be rescued. That's what that means. So for example, in phase 3B, applications receive a preliminary score, and then those applications are sent or are discussed. There may be applications that are below the cutoff of the score where reviewers feel that there's a compelling reason to bring it up for discussion.
All right. And does the editorial board provide initial written reviews during phase 1?
No, so during phase 1, there are no written comments provided by the editorial board members.
Right. And maybe you can just talk about what type of reviewer comments or feedback PIs receive at the end of the review process.
Sure. So for applications that end at phase 1, you won't receive any written comments from the review process. You will receive a statement that talks about the application process. It's sort of general. For those that were advanced to phase 2 and have written comments from the middle reviewers, you will receive those written comments, but you will not receive a summary statement. And for those applications that are discussed in phase 3, you will receive a full summary statement, including a summary of the discussion as well as the reviewer comments.
Let's see. What happens if a reviewer guesses the identity of the applicant?
So I think Trish answered this question in a way earlier. So really, the reviewer may not know who you are. I mean, they may think they know. So as long as your application goes through the anonymization screening, the reviewer will be commenting on the science.
And do I need to suggest a study section for my application?
No, so all applications submitted to this request for applications or this funding opportunity are reviewed in the study section that's designated specifically for the Transformative Research Award.
Right, and what proportion of grants make it through the different phases and how many are funded?
So in terms of how many grants advance from phase 1 to phase 2, phase 2 to phase 3, it's roughly 50%, slightly more than 50% that advance from phase 1 to phase 2 and then from phase 2 to phase 3. I can't tell you the exact numbers of applications. And in terms of funding, I think Trish has already addressed the funding success rate.
This is open to both of you, I guess. How can reviewers fairly evaluate the validity of an idea without citation references?
Do you want to take that, Sarita?
I can try. So I think, the reviewers are looking at sort of the logic of what you're proposing, the rationale, the impact, the transformative nature of it. So they're kind of going to, I think, if you put a citation there, they're going to say, okay, this has been published, or there's some citation for it. So they're going to take that on faith, I believe, at least during the anonymized phase. Once it gets to the later phase, the last phase, they will have full access to the application. And so they will be basing it on your standard, rigor of prior research that happens in a normal R01 review. So because they will have access to the citations, the references, the reference list as well. So I think they look at it at the end, but for the initial stages of review, I don't think that's a big concern of theirs. Trish, you can certainly add.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think sometimes we have heard a couple complaints from reviewers that say they wish they could look up some of these papers that are cited, but in general, make sure that you have the right information, enough information that they can evaluate your ideas and the innovation that you're talking about. I think it's, they are not supposed to need to go to any outside sources anyway. So I think that if you get your ideas there and you communicate them clearly, and as Sarita said, they see that there's a little number 7 next to the statement, they know that something has been published, and they have to sort of take it on faith that it's a legitimate paper. So yeah, I think that you need to talk about it clearly in the text too.
Right, and Trish, why is this funding mechanism anonymized?
Oh, right. I talked about that earlier. Maybe you missed it, but a few years back, 2019, the advisory committee to the director was a bit concerned that we weren't seeing applications from a diverse pool of institutions. And so we really wanted to try to make it clear that it didn't matter if you were at a research intensive institution or not in order to propose these transformative ideas. So the idea is if we strip that away from the first 2 stages of the review, does it make a difference? And we have seen just sort of anecdotally, it's not powered, that PIs have appreciated the anonymized review and they actually like it. Maybe these are only the PIs that fare well in review, I don't know, but they actually chose to apply to this because it was anonymized. We will eventually, once the pilot is complete and we have enough data to report on it, it'll be on our website under evaluations of what the results are. And I can't promise that we're going to do this forever. I don't know the answer to that.
All right, and also for you, Trish, what happens if identifying information is accidentally included in the specific aims or research strategy section?
Yeah, unfortunately, the application might well have to be administratively withdrawn. So if the track tool identifies it, then there's a team of NIH staff that goes and looks at those, all of those, and evaluates whether or not that violated one of the rules. And if it did, then it will be administratively withdrawn. There's not a chance to rewrite it and resubmit until, the next year you could do that. But that's why we're really suggesting you use that tool and you be really careful about this. Follow the rules on it. Otherwise, it could be administratively withdrawn. What does that mean? It means it's not going to be reviewed, and it certainly can't be supported, can't be funded.
All right, Trish, will an example of an application with a clinical trial be available on the website?
I don't remember if I know there are examples on the website, but I don't remember if any of them include a clinical trial. So,
No, they do not.
yeah, I think not. But, you write it as you would any other clinical trial. You just don't talk about the institution and the IRB approval in those 2 sections, in the specific aims or the research strategy. Just make sure you don't break anonymity. But you still want to talk about obviously the science, but you want to talk about numbers of how many participants you're going to recruit. All of those things are still part of it.
And you need to go to our website as well.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So if you're, thank you, Becky. If you're going to propose a clinical trial, we have a list of the contacts that you need to contact. So for example, if you know that your research is going to fall under the umbrella of, let's just say, NIAID, or mental health or anywhere else, there's a list there. You go to that contact person and talk to them about what their institute or center requires for clinical trials, because they will be slightly different across the different institutes or centers. And we didn't really cover it, but if an award is made, the application gets transferred to the most scientifically relevant institute or center, and it's administered then by NIAID or mental health or wherever it's most relevant. So you need to follow their rules. So take a look at that list. And if you need help, you can email us at the email right there, transformative_awards, and we can help direct you.
All right. Well, those are all the questions that have been submitted. So unless any come in the next second, otherwise we can close out. I'd like to thank our panelists and thank you all for joining us and submitting your questions. As a reminder, a recording of the webinar and slides will be posted on our website at commonfund.nih.gov/TRA. Please give us 1 to 2 weeks to get that up. We have some compliance and issues we have to make sure we meet before we can post them. Meanwhile, if you have additional questions or we didn't answer your question satisfactorily enough, you can email us again at transformative_awards@mail.nih.gov and we will answer them. So thank you all for attending.
Thanks. We look forward to seeing your applications in a couple months. Bye.
Bye.
All right.